Hi, so today we're going to continue our discussion of parts of speech. So just to reiterate what I said in the previous class, so we will be having our first assignment or assessment test, if you will, on September 14th. So that's Monday, all right? So it's not next week, it's the following week from that. And that test will cover materials from our first chapter on descriptive and prescriptive grammar, informal and formal styles, and standard, non-standard grammar, as well as what we've learned about clauses, phrases, and finally now, parts of speech, okay? So today we continue with our discussion of nouns. Friday, and perhaps we'll get into verbs as well. Friday we continue, and next week we continue as well, talking about the different parts of speech, okay? And thank you so much for your patience. Despite today's technological difficulties, this seems to be working when it's me on my own. I don't have any microphone difficulties, so I'm gonna take advantage of this and record the class. Okay, so we said that in the English language, we have 8 parts of speech. One of the most important ones is nouns. Why? Because it's the largest part of speech. It's the one with the most dictionary entries. And it only makes sense. Why? Because, you know, as human beings, part of the reason why we communicate and we have language is to make sense of the world and the things around us. So oftentimes we'll come up with names to represent the things out there in the world. So names to stand for objects, people, places, experiences. So all of these names or labels are nouns, okay? So nouns are the largest category of parts of speech. And we spoke a little bit about all the different kinds of nouns in our last class. And then finally, we also said that pronouns are considered by linguists as a noun, a type of noun. So it's not its own part of speech, but it's a subtype of noun. And the reason why it's considered a subtype of noun is because, well, we said this in the class before it cut off, is because a pronoun behaves like a noun. It can behave like a noun. So it adopts a similar position in a sentence. And so we can find it in subject position or in object position. And it can stand for a name. So like it can stand for phone, it can stand for mug, right? So he, she, it, we, they, all of those are different examples of pronouns. So it behaves syntactically as nouns would. So it is, for our purposes, a subtype. All right, so there are different kinds of pronouns, the same way that there are different kinds of nouns. Let's start with the first category. So in terms of types of pronouns, we can have definite pronouns. So these point to a specific entity that is known between in the context. So if we say she, her, that means that we know who she, her is. It's a specific person. It's definite. I, me, we, us, you, they, them. All of these are known entities in a spoken utterance or sentence. Then we have a reflexive pronoun. So a reflexive pronoun refers to, you know, the act of reflecting back. So we can say me, myself, itself, so mug, ourselves, right? So it's this act of reflection. Then we have indefinite pronouns, which is the opposite of definite. So indefinite is when the person or the entity thing is not known. So we tend to say words like something. So bring me something from the supermarket. And then you're like, okay, but what do you want? Just bring me something like a memory or whatever, some food, whatever, right? someone. So when you're trying to be vague about people, I heard from someone, right? So it's indefinite. Anything, you don't care about anything. So anyone, I don't need anyone. Then we also have demonstrative pronouns. So demonstrative pronouns point to things, right? And I think we use a lot of this in our Puerto Rican Spanish, so in place of the name of something, right? So we say this, that, these, those, right? So we have that in English to stand for a subject. So the phone, right? So I previously mentioned the phone, and then I'm like, oh, give me that, right? Or, oh, you want this? And then I gave it to someone else. In Spanish, all the time, we're like, dame eso. ¿verdad? Right? We're always like, eso, esto, all the time. O aquello, o aquella. So we like to demonstrate and even sometimes even point, use our hands. Interrogative pronouns. So these tend to start with the combination of sounds, W, H, right? So who, which, what. Then we have possessive pronouns. So these stand for things that we own or we possess that are ours. So those are yours, okay? So see, possessive pronoun is different from saying, this is your book. Because there, in that sentence, your book, your is not acting like a pronoun. It's not substituting book, okay? Your in your book is pointing to book. So it's acting like a demonstrative, your book. Versus a possessive pronoun, you wouldn't have book. So I could say, that house is yours, right? Or this is mine. What is mine? This or that is yours. So it's substituting things. His, hers, ours, theirs. So it's not pointing to an upcoming noun. It's substituting a noun. And same way we can talk about different types of pronouns. Going back to the example of proper nouns, we could talk about different types of proper nouns. So proper nouns are the names for things that we give. So we could give names to pretty much anything, so specific names. So for starters, we give names to people like Michelle Obama or Joe Biden or Catherine Morales or Beyonce, right? So celebrities like Beyonce. We give names to computer companies and manufacturers, Microsoft. We give names to electronic companies, Apple, car manufacturers, Toyota, Hyundai. We give names to planets, Venus, Mars, continents, day names, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. All of these names are capitalized. So notice how in standard English spelling conventions, when we talk about names, we exploit the use of capitalization of the first letter, all right? And this is something that some of you, I've noticed in your writing, take for granted. So you don't capitalize names, but according to standard grammar, you're breaking the rules. So you wanna follow the rules so you get a better chance at the professional world. Okay, so languages as well are capitalized, like Spanish, English, French, and among others, or many types of pronouns. So we also said that nouns have the capacity to be inflected. Not only that, but nouns can also have the genitive or possessive form. What is the genitive or possessive form? So the genitive and possessive form is a little bit different to the other type of inflection that we were talking about that nouns take. So remember that we said that nouns, we could talk about nouns as them being singular or as them being plural. And the way that we mark the plural form is by using an S, adding a morpheme S. But we could also add another type of inflection to communicate something else about the noun. In this case, the genitive is possession. So what conventions do we use to indicate possession of a noun? We use apostrophe S, okay? So the capacity to indicate that nouns possess something is unique to nouns. Adjectives don't possess something. Prepositions don't possess something. Verbs don't, right? It's nouns that have the ability to possess. This function of possession is attributive. It's a noun modifying another, typically noun, okay? So it's attributive, meaning that it's the relationship of one noun to another noun. All right? So we can say bills. So bill is a name, and then we add apostrophe S to talk about the possession of bill. So that is bills, right? Or those are bills, as we see in the last example. Bills, Bill's pancakes. So these pancakes are owned by Bill or made by Bill, or the store is by Bill. Muds. Now we're talking about mud and tierra. Mud's consistency. We're talking about a quality of mud that mud possesses. So in the first example, we were talking about a person, and now we're talking about something of nature, right? Joke. So joke is a little bit more abstract. We can talk about it as it being perhaps a type of abstract noun. I mean, what is a joke? It depends on the culture. The joke's punchline, all right? So punchline is kind of like that one haha point that is owned by the joke. So again, notice that this apostrophe S is marking that relationship between one noun and another noun, okay? So this is the genitive or possessive form that nouns have the capacity to take. They have the capacity to be inflected for plural or for the genitive form, right? So in sum, we could talk about different characterizations of nouns. We can talk about different kinds of nouns. So we have concrete, common nouns, proper nouns, pronouns, abstract nouns, count and mass nouns, etc. And we could also talk about nouns as being the largest class of parts of speech, as every day we introduce more nouns into our vocabulary as our times change and there are more technological innovations and people coming up with names for things all the time. All right, so we move on to verbs. So verbs are the second most important, or almost as important as nouns. Verbs are used to describe the situation of whatever is being expressed in a clause. So verbs basically determine the kind of situation that we're talking about. In a sentence, a verb is in predicate position. So the dog barked, what's the situation? There's a context or event in the world taking place where something barked, so we're describing the situation. It is impossible. I have a headache, right? So verbs describe the situation. I open the door. What's the situation? A door in some world or reality is being opened by me. Keyword, opened. The building collapsed. What's the situation? A building in some world or reality collapsed. So the key word here is collapsed. They know the rules. What's the situation? Someone or a group of people know the rules. Keyword, or the head of the phrase, if you will, know. Okay? So just like nouns, verbs have the capacity to take morphemes or be inflected, and possibly even more so than nouns or any other part of speech. In fact, as we will learn in the future, we can talk about 12 different ways in which verbs are tensed, or we inflect verbs for tense. Okay. In fact, we can talk about many different ways that verbs can communicate tense, as much as 12. And sometimes when we communicate tense, we tend to inflect verbs in a particular manner. So the most distinctive grammatical property of verbs, more than anything, is the capacity to be inflected, more than nouns or any other part of speech. So one of the most important inflections for a verb is realized to communicate the time at which an event happened. So this is also known as the tense of a verb. There are three basic tenses: past, present, future. But these can be broken down into further categories, as much as 12. But verbs have an inflectional contrast. That means they can take a morpheme for past and present forms. But however, for future tense, verbs don't tend to be inflected. So in the present tense, there are two forms depending on properties of the subject, whether it is singular or plural. She works in Paris. They work in Paris. So we're talking about the present, el presente. In the present, if we're talking about third person singular, we add an S. She, ella. If we're talking about third person plural, they, we don't have that S inflection. Verbs in the past tense are marked by an inflection called preterite, pretérito, to talk about the past. So in a regular verb, verbo regular, typically we know that a regular verb can take the morpheme ed at the end. So a regular verb is a verb like worked, play, walk. So she worked in Paris. An irregular verb can't take that morpheme at the end, but there needs to be an internal change instead. So examples of irregular verbs are verbs like know, sang, swim, right? So in this case, we're talking about know in the past tense. So we have an internal change. So he knew the answer, right? So irregular verbs don't take inflectional morphemes, so endings, for marking time. Instead, we sometimes have a change, an internal change, or sometimes the word is changed altogether. So for example, one of the most irregular verbs out there, or notoriously irregular verbs, is the verb is, okay? Or to be. The inflectional form of is to be. So to be can be is. If we're talking about one thing, it could be are. If we're talking about many things, it could be was in the past tense, were in the past tense. you know, it can be a lot of things. Other examples: begin, began, begun. Here we have an internal change. Break, broke, broken. Bring, brought, brought stays the same in past tense and past participle. Buy, bought, bought. Build, built, built. All right. So in this case, these verbs are considered irregular because when we conjugate them to form the past tense or the preterites, the past tense, there's an internal change or a change of the word altogether. So it's not as predictable as conjugating regular verbs by adding that final ed. So a verb's role in relation to the structure of a sentence. So the function of a verb. So verbs occur as heads in a verb phrase. They are the most important word in a predicate clause. Verbs determine what other elements, words can occur within a verb phrase. She arrived the airport. Wrong, right? She arrived at the airport is correct. Why? Because in this case, our verb, which is arrived, is indicating that, you know, it's indicating that it needs some kind of spatial follow-up. So she arrived. Okay, where did she arrive? The airport. Huh? There seems to be a word missing or another part of speech. And in this case, we need the preposition, which indicates space, right? So arrived is giving us this information in its sense. So she arrived. We can say she arrived, all right. But if we want to say, we want to specify where she arrived, we can combine it with a preposition phrase, or, you know, a preposition followed by a noun. So there are different types of verbs or subtypes of verbs. We can have lexical verbs and we can have auxiliary verbs. So lexical verbs make up the large general vocabulary of verbs. So lexical verbs are like the ones like walk, run, play, run, right? So run, eat, sing, explain, recycle, shatter, prepare, depend. Versus auxiliary verbs, they tend to play more of a grammatical role. So we use auxiliary verbs to combine a lot of the times with lexical verbs. So some examples of auxiliary verbs that play a more grammatical role or a restricted role are be, have, and do, and can, could, will, would, shall, should, may, might, must, need. All of these are examples of auxiliary verbs, and these are important. So make sure that you revise them. Okay, we'll stop it at here.